particularly of interest in Southeast Asia for people calling in from around the region who are focused on that segment. We're also really super excited to announce a session with one of the founders and the CEO of Archipelago, John Flood. They do a session on forward vision. So I'm really looking forward to that one. We're finalizing the date, but it looks like it's going to be May the 19th. So stay tuned for details on that. Great to get kind of views from the top of one of the world's kind of leading hospitality brands, one of the fastest growing hospitality brands in our region. We're really excited for that. So getting started with today's webinar, we're all talking about winning and recovery, and I've got four panelists joining here with me today, and I'm gonna allow them to introduce themselves. But we have first Sunish from Chroma Hospitality in Philippines. Sunish, welcome, and give a brief introduction for yourself.
Hey guys, I'm from Philippines. Sunish Sudhakivan, I'm currently managing Chroma Hospitality's revenue management as well as on the Philippines for last 8 years. We are a management company who owns and manages Crimson and Quest brands in the Philippines, with 7 hotels we manage at the moment. And we are going international with our first hotel being opening in Koh Samui, the Crimson Koh Samui. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Anish. Over to Apurva with RateGain. Welcome. Brief introduction for you, Apurva.
Thank you. This is Apurva Chamaria. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for RateGain. And RateGain globally works with 200,000 hotels on revenue management, distribution, and social media marketing. Happy to be here with industry colleagues and friends.
Great. We also have 2 more panelists. Looks like they may have dropped out. So we will hope they will be able to rejoin us, and we'll get moving while we wait and hope that they're able to join. One of which is Matthew Fall. He is with Swiss Bell Hotel, and he's probably one of the most famous e-commerce revenue managers in the region. So a really great practitioner for us to learn from. So I'm optimistic he will be able to rejoin. But we will go ahead and get started with the session while we wait to see if he's able to rejoin. So we're really talking about winning and recovery. And I really think we're going to go from like the top down, And so I think one of the most important things is just to understand where you're currently at. And we have people calling in today from India, from Philippines, from Dubai, and from actually New Zealand. So I want to just start off with you guys giving us a first-person assessment of what's actually happening in both your business as well as your market today. Sunish, why don't we start with you in the Philippines?
Sure, absolutely. I think for Chroma, and not only for Chroma, I think for the whole Philippines economy, especially when it comes to the hotels, it's something which is. I want to start with a negative word, which is scary, especially when it comes to revenue management and distribution. But again, mainly because when you look at the demand curve, which is there right now, where even if you look at a demand curve which has started from Feb up to December, you can see it is at the lowest over the last few years. So that's really something which is scary. So basically, and even when you look at something like a future demand curve, we are only seeing the recovery, and some of those slides I've shared so that people could look at it at a few after this webinar. But when we look at those, we see that the recovery is only by sometime in Feb 2021. And that's really scary for us. Also, that we have been in lockdown since the 13th of March. And we do not see this lockdown to be completely taken off by and at least until the end of May. So that's scary for sure. And then we don't know how the next new normal will be, which we'll talk about at a later stage.
Yeah, great. So domestically in Philippines, are people traveling or not?
Domestically, there is no travel at all. At the moment, the only kind of business which we are seeing is the kind of BPO staff as well as the medical practitioners or any of the seafarers who are coming back to the Philippines. And these are all mostly group business, which we will see until the time that there's a lockdown. The moment the lockdown is done, you will start seeing that this business will also go off. So that's going to be the next scary part, which all the hotels have to start looking at already. And and I
All
do
right.
not see this to be see this crisis to be going on. Yeah, at least 3 months or more.
So Philippines on lockdown. Paul, I see Paul joining. Paul from Maison is joining. Joining Maison Privé is joining. So thanks for joining us from Dubai. What's happening in Dubai at the moment as it relates to kind of your business and alternative accommodations as well as travel? Complete lockdown. Okay, we lost Paul. I think Dubai is also just still under complete lockdown. Not much happening there. Purva, over to you in India. What's the situation on the ground in India?
So India is completely lockdown, Brett, and we are calling it the world's largest lockdown because 1.3 billion people are in complete lockdown. And the way India is thinking about opening up is there will be three zones. So the first is a red zone where cases have been found in the last 14 days. The second is the amber zone where cases have been found in last 30 days. And then there is a green zone. So there are almost 800 districts in India, and almost 90% of districts are completely locked down. So no bookings, no travel.
Nothing happening. Nothing happening in India. And over to Matthew. Matthew, I see you were able to join. Matthew from Swissmo. Thanks for connecting back in. You're today in New Zealand. What's happening in New Zealand today?
Well, I'm based out I'm hanging out in New Zealand at the moment. New Zealand's basically in lockdown as well. All the hospitalities, all the leisure and most of the corporate hotel stuff is sort of ground to a halt. But we are starting to see a little bit of a small recovery now that some restrictions have been lifted, but it's mainly niche business where we're seeing hotel business here. Actually, it's niche business for most of our regions, such as Indonesia, Middle East, New Zealand. We are seeing some pickup in the forward bookings in the third and fourth quarters, but at the moment it's not terribly great except for certain niche business in certain markets. Certainly a general leisure market is gone.
Thanks for the quick update, Paul. I see you rejoined. The situation in Dubai right now is just there's also no travel. Is alternative accommodations also the same? Are there any bookings happening in this space?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, Brett, because in Dubai, while the market is closed and the vast majority of hotels are closed, we're seeing quite strong traffic from long stay guests. So in the vacation rental side of things, although our numbers are significantly behind where we had forecast for this time of the year, it's not as catastrophic as it might be otherwise, and as I'm sure it is for the hotels. So we're really pivoting towards that long stay, no commitment type traffic, where guests will stay on monthly bookings, and we're finding very strong performance, particularly in our portfolio of villas and high-end properties. People want to have a comfortable place to stay for an extended period while they're waiting out to see what happens.
That's great. Thanks for the quick update there. So that's kind of a quick landscape on what's the situation where you're at today. Let's talk about kind of the first step in thinking about planning for the recovery. It's kind of your assumption around when do things restart, right? And why do you think that is? So we've talked about in previous calls, and I know you all probably have developed in your own organization models around how do you think about recovery. So we've talked about this idea of kind of the first phase called restricted, and then returning. I think everyone's most focused now on what to do now during lockdown, and what do they think are their hypotheses around what to do and when will recovery happen, right? So what are your assumptions around when travel begins to resume in some of your key markets, and why are you assuming that? So just kind of taking a look around the region right now, Southeast Asia, Vietnam is actually just beginning to open up. April 23rd, they began to allow some domestic travel to happen. Hotels are reopening. Malaysia is still holding on to May 12th, but the rest of the region largely until the beginning of June at minimum. Philippines, I'm not really sure what the date to be open there is. Maybe, Sunish, you have some more insights. And for those of you in the other markets, if you have insights around when it's going to come back in some of these core inbound markets for the region, that'd be great as well. So why don't we head over to Sunish, an update on when do you think the recovery is going to start? What's your current operating assumption, and why do you think that?
All right. I think as a hotel company, we have been a bit fortunate that we have been able to get a few of the local businesses, especially the BPO industries, as well as some of the seafarers in some cases, mostly groups, is staying with us right now. So in terms of that, until the lockdown is there, these people will be staying with us. But in terms of the opening of the market, the domestic market, I do not see it opening at least until the 15th of July or the 1st of August even. We differ with me at period, but especially looking at the kind of messages out from the government side and all the different entities in the government, is that new normal is going to be very different, and it will really take some time for the hotels to start to do the new normal. And that's why we think that it will be only starting even with the domestic market by 1st of August. And that will be only for the domestic market, and would be within the region itself. Basically, it will mean that somebody who is in Manila may not be able to travel to Boracay or Cebu until maybe September. So basically that's scary a bit, because so that's why everybody has to be prepared for it. So in terms of the business, we see that only by the end of the year we look at some sort of a recovery, and by next year, Feb or March, we are starting to see a demand from our major markets coming in.
So essentially, minimum volume. Sounds like you're lucky with some BPO volume, but minimum volume until July. July, your current operating assumption is mid-July, things begin to start up again, but are going to slowly roll in Philippines. Okay, let's flip over to. Great, thanks. Let's flip over to Matthew from Swiss Bell. Matthew, what's your current operating assumption? Maybe you can speak for both Indonesia as well as any other markets, since I know you're in New Zealand now. But I know you're one of the biggest markets. Certainly is Indonesia that you're focused on. Can you give us some insights? What's your current assumption for when does Indonesia travel start up?
I mean, for domestic travel for Indonesia, we're expecting to start up in June, July, and start rising. We're already starting to see corporate meeting style bookings kicking off for obviously Q2 and Q3, but inquiries for earlier than that in the June, July sort of areas. Australia and New Zealand, June, July, probably for domestic business as well. But it's going to be a slow increase. The main issue, though, is international travel is international travel for New Zealand is probably what we're hearing is going to be offline for up to 2 years for any significant increase in international travel. That said, we are looking that perhaps sometime this year we might actually get a shared bubble with Australia. and given New Zealand and Australia's tourists are somewhere between 60 and 70% domestic, that does help us quite a bit for this region. For Indonesia, my impression is the government wants to open up as soon as possible, but obviously the cautionary state there is one, whether their virus numbers are sufficiently low that other countries will let people travel there and travel there without having to spend 14 days when you arrive and 14 days when you leave type thing. So
it's really great.
It's
really great to hear the optimism on Indonesia. I know a lot of people are optimistic for June in Indonesia, but it seems like Indonesia is just getting started. They're kind of one of the last for the virus to begin becoming a problem. Why do you think there's so much optimism around June as the target? Potentially, June is a target for a return.
June, July. Basically, we are getting inquiries in that area, so there is that that sort of expectation, and it may unfortunately turn out to be worse than we think. But Indonesia, in terms of a country, and I guess some other countries are like this, is to a certain extent, I think they may end up having to work through the virus because Indonesia, there's a lot where the cogs just need to keep working to keep the country working, which I think that is part of the optimism, and that may be part of the push through. We will just have to see how the country does handle increases in the infection rate and actually what does happen there. I mean, we've seen around the world the virus does seem to spread in different patterns in different countries. Some seem to get hit worse than others, and there doesn't seem to be a concrete reason why that's happening yet. Everyone seems to be a little bit confused about that.
Well, I like the optimism, and I hope that we begin to see the June return in Indonesia. Let's kick over to Paul in Dubai. Paul, what's your current operating assumption for your alternative accommodation space for volumes beginning to return?
I think there's two key sides to this sort of reopening, and the first is probably the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a very, very important market for Dubai. Once traffic is allowed to come from Saudi, I think we'll see at least that demand coming back very quickly. I think there'll be a real desire on part of the population there to get out and about and rejoin vacation. So that would be an important change. I think next after that is the port. The fact that Dubai is a regional hub for regional headquarters for a lot of large international companies. There'll be a big pent-up sales cycle and type of traffic that will be opened up as quickly as is feasible. I think that those types of clients will naturally, allow for extended stay, particularly if there's any sort of a lockdown period when you arrive to potentially be 2 weeks. They might well want to come for a number of weeks in order to do what needs to be done. So I think those two traffic sources I think would be great for us. The larger tourist base, I think we're just going to have to see how things go internationally in terms of opening up different markets, how the aviation sector deals with this. The idea of social distancing on aircraft, I think, is not really a viable option. So it's going to be about how testing is carried out at airports and other terminals with the degree of certainty that those traveling do not carry the virus. I think once we get to that point, we'll be in a good place. But I think before that sort of certainty comes, I think it'll be very difficult.
Your current operating assumption is next year.
Yeah, I think pretty much for everything to get back to any sort of a new version of normal, I think it'll be the new year.
All right, last, let's go to the biggest country on lockdown. Purva from Raycane. What's Raycane's current assumption for some of your key markets on when does travel begin recovering?
So, we process about 20 billion transactions through our distribution pipes a month. And this is across 150 countries. We have a good view into how is demand shaping up. And we are already seeing China up 35% from the bottom, which it had hit. We're seeing South Korea starting to give bookings. We are seeing Vietnam starting to give bookings. Australia has started opening up. We are seeing bookings there. Uh, US surprisingly is doing, between 30 to 40,000 transactions a day, and we don't think it's a broad recovery. Uh, this is partially happening because of two facts. One is a lot of hotels have launched zero cancellation fee, and they're also giving offers on advance bookings. And the second is there is a particular segment of travelers. These are emergency workers, healthcare workers, first responders, uh, including people who are displaced by virus. People who were consultants, who are stranded, international students, supply chain workers, air cargo and rail crews. So these are the segments which are possibly leading to uh, bookings going up in some of these regions.
Does India come back? Is India domestic market start to recover June, July, September? What can we plan for? So we're going to build our restricted phase plan. What month should we assume?
So in India, till now, the government is of the view that travel and hospitality is not a part of the essential services list, which the government will allow to open up in the first go. Essential services are basically food, grocery, healthcare. So, and I was on a couple of webinars with the hotel CEOs in India. India is definitely travel and hospitality is not opening up for the next 2 to 3 months.
Wow. Okay. So essential services. I don't know if you saw this. These protests in the U.S. It's funny to watch the Americans talk about. Hey, man, the government doesn't tell me what essential services are, and if I think my business is essential, I keep it open. So I think it's interesting to see the different responses across different cultures and the dynamics at play there. I think it's looking more like the U.S. is going to take what Matthew is calling working through the virus approach as well. I don't know they're going to be able to contain what's happening on the ground there. So thanks for the quick views on kind of your perspective on when we'll begin to recover, right? So let's think about if we think that it's going to be end of year or it's going to be June, July, or going to be October for Philippines. What do you think the first segments are? So once you have an assumption around when travel restarts, kind of the next question is who is it going to be, and then we can talk about what are their requirements going to be, how are you going to target them, how do you price for them, but everybody seems to cling on to domestic. That's a pretty broad statement, domestic. So maybe we can get a little more specific. If you think it's domestic, for your market, domestic from where to where, what type of customer, corporate, leisure, group, what have you. So, Matthew, maybe we can start with for you, since we're the most optimistic, you and I, around Indonesia and continuing to work through this thing. What do you think the first segments that you'll be looking to target coming into the recovery phase will be?
It's clearly going to be corporate, but some leisure coming through at the same time for corporate and leisure domestic. Same for New Zealand and Australia, corporate domestic, and some leisure coming through first. In terms of international visitors, I think all markets are hoping for international startup as soon as possible. And we're expecting the first international market to start traveling to probably be China.
Yeah. China just announced today that they set a new date for the kind of big government committee meeting. That's a big sign that if all of the government bodies are coming together for this, they're kind of approving, sanctioning that, hey, domestic travel and groupings are safe. We're getting back to normal. So that's definitely going to power up the domestic market there. I'm also more optimistic on China returning to key international travel, especially in the corporate side, because you have so many projects going on. I think as soon as it's allowed, you won't see the same volumes, but there's going to be significant volume out of China into some of the key areas where they're running businesses, and Indonesia is certainly one of those.
Yep.
Paul, what do you see in Dubai? What are the initial segments going to be? Even though you're kind of pessimistic on a near term restart, what will kind of bring back travel? I mean, Dubai's become real China heavy in the last 12 months, pre-crisis, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a strongly growing segment, but I do think that similar to how Matthew was talking about the growth in the corporate travel first, I think we'll experience that here as well. I mean, go back to the comments I made about the regional headquarters for a lot of international companies being here in Dubai. I think that's going to be a very important source of clients for this market initially. And as I said, with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia opening up hopefully sooner rather than later to allow travel from there to here within the region, whether it's by flight or by road, I think that will be the earliest signs of demand that we see here. I think the larger international picture will remain to be seen then in terms of people moving on longer haul flights, etc., to come here on vacation. I think that will be the last element that will really begin to open back up.
I mean, it's really got to be a pivot, at least for some organizations, in that if you were primarily targeting international inbound, do you just sit it out until international China returns? Or do you pivot and begin trying to target some of these groups that you weren't traditionally targeting? So I think for the marketing team, sales team, it represents, agreeing to sit it out for a much longer time, or potentially pivoting to new customer groups that you weren't targeting before, right?
Well, if I can take that, I mean, certainly from a vacation rental perspective, we've been very lucky to be able to pivot to the extent that we have as quickly as we have. I mean, we saw our OTA bookings drop to single digits as everybody else did. But we were very quickly able to turn on our direct sales and our direct marketing to make sure that we captured other long stay residential type business that was here in the market. So where we have uncertainty, you have people who are unwilling or certainly reluctant to take out annual leases, for example. So they can come to somebody like us who provides extended stay accommodation in fully furnished, fully ready apartments, penthouses, villas, etc. And they can make a decision to stay in accommodation like that with no commitment, with a lot of flexibility, at a competitive price point, rather than signing a lease for 12 months when they don't know whether they're going to have a job or not in 6 months' time because of the nature of the market. So for us, it's been very fortuitous, I suppose, to be able to provide that type of accommodation service, and we've seen huge demand. And our bookings are 95% through our direct sales channels, and performing quite well.
Every hotelier on the call just got jealous when you said 95% direct. That's an amazing number. So I think this is a really, really critical point for all leaders, in that you need to look at how do you think the recovery is going to happen in the initial phases? Who are those customers, and are these the customers that you traditionally targeted? And if they're not, you got to plan that, okay, I'm going to sit it out for longer than everybody else, or I'm going to pivot and try to find a way to capture business from these new segments, right? So going through and thinking about this initial few months of recovery time, and thinking about very specifically who are the customers, which companies, which markets, what traveler personas, and do I have structures that actually let me get to them? I think is a really important part of the process. I don't know if Sunish, are you guys kind of rethinking your targeting for the recovery?
For every hotel company to basically start looking at the demand in terms of what the flights or the hotel searches happening the next 12 months over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Where when you look at those type of data, especially for your market, especially coming from the different main market segments which you have, or the main countries from where your business comes in. That is whether those business is being searched in by a individual or whether it's being searched by families. So those are the type of things which you can look at, and that is the time that you can already see that what is the type of business which I really need to go and target out. And one of the things which has to be very important that you need to somehow consolidate your marketing. Currently, especially when I look at independent world, one of the things which I see is that there is a big gap between what a marketing person is doing versus an e-commerce person versus a revenue management. So there is a big disconnect in there. So during a crisis like this, I think it's a very good opportunity to bring all these functions together and put it all together into one place and put the strategies all together so that kind of strategy based on everything which is happening in the online world as well as the offline world. Not that marketing is doing everything based on things happening in the offline world. So that's a big disconnect which we need to bring it out during a period like this. Yeah, that's what Chroma has been, and we are seeing that domestic market, especially in terms of domestic corporate, that's where the business may start coming in first. But again, one area where we see that the business may not come in will be groups, especially with the new normal which may be put up by the government, wherein a lot of people may not be able to do a meeting together and all that.
Well, we just did a webinar the other day with a GM from Bandung, and these guys are pretty bullish on groups. Maybe small, maybe a bit small or no giant groups, but there are some people who are really bullish on corporates really wanting to get back to meetings, and you just got to set up the structure so they can feel safe. But there are some people who are really bullish on kind of medium and small size groups, even in the early days of recovery in the corporate segment. So I think you can look forward to that. Lots of going a bit crazy here.
I think a lot also depends on the government. The way the government is gonna put the next instructions on when the new opening or the new normal will be, and that's gonna affect at least until the end of 2020. That's what I think.
So that's a
I'm
good
not
trend.
sure about Indonesia. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good transition into the next question, which we wanted to talk about kind of what operational changes are hotels going to have to make. And it'd be great if you could speak about, your particular operation. What changes have you made, or have you observed others already made? If you're still taking some guests now, you must have already made some changes. And then if you are if you're planning other changes for recovery. So we've seen a lot of brands announce new kind of clean health standards. I know Matthew Swissbell just announced, I think today, kind of a new standard around hygiene and how they're going to be maintaining their properties to assure guest safety. So let's talk about, you can cover everything from the front desk check-in process to room cleaning, other things. What are the operational changes that you guys see as things you've already done or the first critical steps in the operating model?
I guess it's Swiss Bell Hotel. I mean, we'd already implemented some, a lot of changes in terms of our operating model, in terms of additional procedures for cleaning the rooms, for keeping the public areas safe and so forth like that. And that is basically to try and keep the safety of our guests and our employees at the forefront. Obviously, there are certain limitations. It's next to impossible to clean every surface everywhere effectively. But our aim is to minimize the chances of getting infected at one of our hotels, which if way possible, from food preparation to kitchens to deliveries to public areas to room cleaning and so forth. Something we are not implementing at this time and probably will never is the any sort of significant time between guests staying in room. As you've seen Airbnb mentioned, I think, before, the 72-hour thing.
Yeah, I saw Airbnb announce its 72-hour window. I'm super interested to see if Paul is trying to do something same in the alternative accommodation space. So
Yeah,
at,
Paul's got a better area here.
at Swiss Bell, you guys have no plans to do this. Hey, nobody stayed in your room for the last 72 hours.
No, we plan to have the room sanitized, but the no 72 hours thing in terms of handling capacity and utilization. I mean, obviously at the moment it's pretty easy to do a 72-hour separation, but as business ramps up, that will be extremely difficult. And I guess similar to the airlines in terms of trying to do separation there. It's just not economical in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, William had a great point on a call the other day with a GM. We were talking about this point, and the idea was hospitals are the standard, right? If you go to stay in a hospital, it's not like they keep the bed empty for 72 hours, right? And nobody asks about it. You just assume it's been well cleaned, right? So if hospitals can do it, certainly we could implement similar hygiene standards in hotels. We wouldn't need to have this 72-hour window.
Yeah, that's what we want to aim for. I guess over to someone else though.
Yeah, Paul, what's happening in your business? Are you guys following Airbnb on this 72-hour window? And do you think that'll stand with Airbnb, or they just came out with that early in the game to show they were doing something?
Look, while I suppose over the last year and a bit, or maybe 2 years, Airbnb have been moving a little bit more towards the sort of professional host type of client. They do have within their portfolio of hosts a huge number of independent, let's say, owner-run operations. In which case, the numbers of guest nights and the numbers of stays that they would have would be, on average, relatively low with durations between guests and all that kind of stuff that would allow for 48-hour, 72-hour gaps between guests. But when it comes to a professional operation, I think applying that type of approach is not really going to be viable. To my mind, it's a bit akin to having the middle seat free on an aircraft, on a single aisle aircraft. It just isn't operationally viable to do it. But I think what we can do as an industry is look to ensure that there are measures taken, potentially certifications, maybe TUV type approved certifications for hygiene and cleanliness. Where certain systems or processes, whether it's fogging or if UV lighting, for example, comes to be proven as a technology to eliminate virus in larger, areas of rooms or otherwise, as has been trialed in hospitals. I think that this type of technology or this type of approach would bring the certainty and the comfort levels which guests need. I mean, certainly in our operation today, what we've done is we've ensured that our cleaners are delivering to enhanced SOPs. We're conducting enhanced audits to make sure that we're validating the cleaning procedures and practices to the degree that we believe is necessary to ensure sanitization of units in between guests. And I think that these types of measures, if they're conducted to the right standard and using the right approaches and procedures, should be sufficient to ensure that there is that degree of comfort, and then we can operate from then on in a normal way.
Right. How about so housekeeping? I guess new standards will emerge as the kind of the minimum level. People will follow those, whether they're government issued or brand issued. New standards will emerge. You generally think consumers are going to be confident in the hygiene levels at hotels, and it will or will not be something that dampens demand. Perv, I don't know. Do you have a? Go ahead.
I would be very much of the view that if there is an international standard applied, that I think it will help everybody achieve that degree of comfort. And I think that it's incumbent on the governments and on the authorities to come together to put in place those measures and those mechanisms in the individual jurisdictions to an international standard that allow that sense of comfort. Otherwise, you're not going to have consistency of approach and of delivery, and that will impact on numbers, I think.
I'm just not optimistic for governments to come together around this, and then there's always costs associated with executing that. But it would be amazing if that could happen. I don't see I don't see hygiene in hotels as a key dampener of demand. I think people will generally trust brands are going to do their best to keep things clean. But I know all people don't agree with me on that. So, Apurva, what's your view on hygiene in hotels as a factor in demand or even differentiation? Would you choose this hotel brand versus that one because you think their hygiene standard is much higher?
So we did some research across a panel, and almost 82% of the guests are saying they would want to see hygiene as a content attribute on OTAs and on social media. And the funny thing is, most hoteliers and guests agree that there are no clearly defined standards of hygiene. So I think as an industry, what we will need to do is create a troika partnership. So, say in Indonesia, the top three, four hotel chains, Archipelago, Tozia, Swiss Bell, if all the CEOs, owners get together and they tie up with the country health authority and they develop a standard, basically the industry will need to come together, work with healthcare organizations and the government to define a standard and then promote it collectively rather than individually. I think distribution partners like us also play a very valuable role. Like I can tell you on our distribution pipes, we are already building content attributes which can take this from the CRS or PMS and distribute it to OTAs. So a lot of OTAs which we speak to are now building out content attributes around health, safety, and hygiene. And this is going to become very, very critical.
Yeah, I mean, my comments would be that sounds like it's going to take forever. Governments coordinate with multiple companies to establish and agree on some standard and then get implemented. It feels okay. Maybe I should worry about that in 2021 or 2022. But in this immediate phase, it seems like you're going to have to do things like Swiss Bell did, which is, hey, we're just going to establish our own standard and go out and communicate to customers. That's what we're doing. So I think on a pragmatic level, my action plan for winning would be you got to establish your own standard and just do it now. Don't wait for anybody else to give you the standard. It's not going to happen in the near term. It's going to take a lot of coordination. So just build your own, roll your own, and make it happen. Get out there and communicate is the near term strategy, and hopefully longer term it can be something like Apurva, you or Paul, you were describing, that we get some governmental.
I think, just to add on to what you're saying. Right?
So let's move from. Go ahead, Apurva.
Yeah, I was just saying, one part will be getting the standards done, like Matthew has already done. He's a fast mover. But the second part is, all your bookings are not coming from direct. It's also going to be distributing it to all the OTAs, wholesalers, demand partners. So change in distribution strategy, including pipes or working with channel managers and switches, which can distribute this new content, is going to be important.
Yeah, totally agree. And then how do you keep that kind of believable? It's kind of like star ratings today. It's like everybody kind of just decides their own star rating system. So with hygiene, it's going to be much more important that there's some degree of objectivity, audits in the process, such that you really believe what you're seeing there. So let's move on to one more topic in the ops section. We're running short on time, but I really want to talk about check-in process. Because I would guess you probably already had to make changes to your kind of operational check-in process, right? So when you think about the check-in process, what changes have you already made to kind of make it more touchless? We could kind of run through this quickly. And what do you see the kind of future check-in process to be? And what would you be doing like right away? I don't want to touch a card key. I don't want to touch 10 pieces of paper. And in a lot of Southeast Asian markets, it's a really paper-heavy process today still, believe it or not. So I don't know who wants to start out with that. I see Sanish is out. So Matthew, why don't we talk with you about what's the process look like today, and what do you think it looks like in the near future?
I mean, in terms of our check-in process, honestly, in terms of the steps in our check-in process,
I think to begin with, a lot of contactless check-in, check-out, and everything will be happening in the hotels. and I'm sure most hello. Uh, I think
Yeah, go ahead. Go
most of
ahead,
the
Sumi.
hotels. I think most of the hotels groups will be already starting at, or if they have not started, I'm sure many of them will start looking into contactless check-ins, checkouts, and everything. So basically, I think that's gonna be very important for future because yeah. In terms of contactless check-in, and then what's going to happen, I'll talk not only as a hotelier but maybe as a traveler. My favorite resort, when I'll be going to the resort. I may not see a warm welcome. I may see someone with a mask welcoming me, or instead of getting my welcome foot cleaning and massage for 15 minutes complimentary in my favorite resort, I may not get it anymore. Instead of that, I may be going to a room which may have a note outside that this room has been specially sanitized for you, and the same thing will be happening with the glass in the room, the water drinking glass, or whether it's anything in the toilets. The toilet seats will be all sanitized, and it will all almost look like a hospital when you will see the housekeeping staff in the corridor. When they come to clean your room, you may have to even leave the room just to make sure that there is a social distancing in there. So those are a lot of big changes which we may see in our hotels as well as the other hotels in the future.
Yeah, my hotel's a hospital. I'm not. That's not an exciting future for me. I did read one hotel brand saying they're not going to clean rooms while guests stay. If you stay multiple nights, nobody goes in your room, both for their safety and staff safety. That doesn't sound an exciting future to me either, Ed. But let's jump over to Matthew. Matthew, you were going through kind of what your view of the near-term kind of check-in process should be, what leaders should be thinking about.
I mean, rolling out true contactless is a fairly long process. We've basically implemented enhanced SOPs for our front desk personnel, which is the utilization of PPE equipment, social distancing where necessary at the desk, and the frequent disinfection of things like keycasts and stuff like that to ensure or minimize the chances of spread in all possible ways. And those types of procedures. Well, certain regions have made it easier to implement more contactless check-ins with allowing contactless credit card transactions and so forth. Certain other markets, that's still quite difficult to achieve. So due to limitations, it's more of a implementing enhanced SOPs, being more careful, implementing frequent disinfection of areas which are touched by different individuals and so forth, and frequent cleaning of public spaces is how our check-in processes have been modified. True contactless, we have looked at for many of our hotels, but it's one of those processes which takes time and requires new hardware to be installed to achieve that.
Yeah, so I love that. It's very actual advice. It's like near term, immediate term. It's like kind of review SOPs and best effort around maintaining kind of top hygiene in the process, existing process, right? And then medium long term, look at the capital investments required to get to a higher level of contactless. Paul, what do you guys do in the alternative accommodations space around check-in process? Was it already fairly touchless or?
Well, we certainly offered it already, so we were well placed to, I suppose, roll it out further across all check-ins as soon as we needed to. Basically, for a cohort of our guests, they often prefer to do seamless self-check-in. Particularly corporates, they don't necessarily want to have somebody handhold them. They prefer to just get on with getting into their apartment or enjoy their stay. So we had already smart locks installed with a process in place to deliver the self-check-in instructions to our guests. So we basically ensured that once this crisis began, we started offering that service to everybody. and only in exceptional circumstances do we provide the assisted check-in with our guest relations exam. So I think it's been, I suppose, a little bit in our favor that we've been able to already have that set up and be able to deliver it straight away.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like you guys kind of benefit somewhat in being kind of well prepared for that coming in. We're going to move on from operations into a revenue management topic. We did include in the slide deck some research from McKinsey that Apurva at RateGain kind of want to provide and share with everyone. It's really a great kind of taxonomy of different areas you might want to look at in the operational process. So we'll include that in the slide deck for all of you to download. Moving on into the next topic, we want to talk about kind of distribution and revenue management, and how does it potentially change. A bit of good news also provided by RateGain is, as you think about rates and pricing along with distribution, good news is it looks like China ADRs are edging up, so a bit of optimism there. But as you think about your approaches to distribution and specifically focused on tactical approaches during this early recovery, how are you thinking about pricing, and how are you thinking about the different distribution channels of OTAs, traditional travel agencies, wholesalers like MG? Talk us through that in particular. Let's go to you, Matthew.
Obviously, we try to push direct wherever possible, but we honestly, as the recovery comes back, we see ourselves utilizing all of the distribution channels, from wholesalers to OTAs to everyone else. Honestly, there's been a large shift. Is using many different channels for their bookings at hotels, whether business bookings or what have you. So the recovery has to be across all channels. There's no doubt about it. Obviously, we'll be reaching out to our loyal guests for direct bookings and so forth. But yeah, there is no change here. We have to work with everyone. The key component will be
I admire most.
To get them to an appropriate price point to what it was before.
And I heard a similar story
as possible.
Sorry, Matthew. I may be losing you. I heard a similar story from Dan Lin from Zuzu, also about, look, you just got to hit every channel when the recovery starts and see what's working. I wonder if you mentioned direct bookings. Do brands view this crisis as an opportunity for them to increase their share of direct bookings? I mean, if you're Paul and at 95%, you're not worried about it. But the rest of the brands, I know everyone's worried about, focused on increasing direct bookings. I know RateGain also is trying to do what they can to support brands growing their direct bookings. Do you think this crisis presents some opportunity?
I mean, for Swiss Bell Hotel, we are seeing our direct bookings rise percentage-wise compared to how it was before. There is some interesting, I guess, opportunity there, because from what I understand is the OTAs have massively dropped their spending in terms of online advertising and Google AdWords and stuff like that. So I guess that does present some opportunity to get some more hits to your direct website organically, and capitalizing that through free social media marketing and so forth is key there to perhaps get your brand and your website out in people's minds and make them realize that perhaps they can get a better deal from the brand website. So that is an area everyone should continue to work on and keep doing this social media marketing. However, to a certain extent, we see business going back to usual afterwards, where we try and get business from more channels. Direct is obviously the cheapest, but there's a lot of channels out there we need to deal with and continue to.
Yeah, so three takeaways from me from that. One is you got to hit every channel and see what works. Two is there is some potential opportunity in direct, potentially if some of the kind of the ad buys you would have avoided before because they were too expensive may be much cheaper in the post-crisis environment. So potentially look at that both in traditional kind of paid search as well as in social. And then one other point I wanted to kind of add on is I think if you think corporate is going to be kind of a key segment, I think doubling down on both relationships and the channels that those key corporate customers in your markets are using could be really important in the early days. So I would also kind of map your model for what are the segments that recover first and how do they buy, and think about that in your distribution strategy. However, RateGain's like right in the middle of distribution. What are you guys thinking around potential changes in the distribution model during the early recovery phase?
So I think what we are seeing a lot of hoteliers speak about is creating more rate plans. So specific rate plans for healthcare workers, packages, and this is during the crisis. Of course, the strategy will change post-crisis. We're also seeing a lot of hoteliers think about how can they, because the ad buys are now almost 25 to 30% cheap. So if you want to advertise on Facebook, if you want to advertise on Instagram, and really use a combination of your first party CRM loyalty data, layer it on to programmatic advertising on social to get bookings, there can never be a better time than now. So we are seeing a lot of hotels now talking to us about, hey, what can I do on Meta? Hey, what can I do on getting direct bookings from Facebook? And also communicating that what are you doing for recovery? What are you doing for health and safety? How are you planning to reopen? So a lot of conversation of social media. Traditionally, this industry has seen social media as important just for brand building and not really important for bookings and conversions. That conversation is now changing.
Right. Great point. Let's move on. We got a couple more topics. I do want to cover pricing. It could be that most people I've talked to around how they're going to price, they're not changing their pricing strategy, or they don't really know how it's going to work out. So they're just going to see how the market emerges, watch their comp set closely, and try to use that to set their pricing strategy. Everyone always says don't drop price, but someone always does. I don't know if Burma, you have any kind of guidance, or Paul or Matthew, if you guys have suggestions or thoughts on how you're going to approach product pricing coming into the recovery.
For us, for us, we did and we didn't drop our price. Our prices have generally dropped, but I think for many of our hotels, our regular markets disappeared. So for many of our locations, so it's not so much. Yes, it is a price drop, but it's also basically a significant market segment shift. We just went to different market segments which we wouldn't have necessarily touched before, such as what Paul has with the long stay market, certain hotels with the medical market, with government and NGOs. I mean, for many locations, it's a pivot to a completely different market segment and take that to keep the hotel open or close the hotel. And those are the decisions we've made in different locations around the world. And that is our approach. Yes, there are price drops, but from a revenue management perspective, our price drops are orientated around finding a new market, not necessarily trying to drop it for the existing market, which is no longer there. Right.
That's great. Great advice. Dinesh, what are you thinking around your assumptions for pricing?
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I think from our point in terms of revenue management, pricing has to be something which we need to be very careful about. If you're going to go into your market and just drop down your prices by 40 or 50%, it will take a long time to go back to the original prices, and it's something which each revenue management team has to think about very carefully before we drop down the prices in any of the market, except that you're going into one market only and doing a special for a certain market where you think you can get more business from.
I really admire that, and I hope that's the case. I just struggle with the supply demand kind of realities of how pricing tends to work out across all markets. I just think there's going to be a lot of people fishing in the same pond, and price is just going to be the easy go-to as everyone kind of desperately grabs for volume. So I hope it works out that way.
But it's definitely cutthroat at the moment.
I'm scared. I'm scared that it's going to be really, really hyper competitive as the recovery starts. I don't know, Paul or Apurva, if you guys have thoughts on how you're going to try to manage through that.
So I think there are two pieces of advice I would give revenue managers who are listening in. One is focus on your existing customers, so your loyalty CRM database. And if you want to selectively reduce prices to get people back, I think that's the first thing you should focus on. So don't do a broad-based price reduction across both direct and OTA. First, focus on your CRM loyalty customers and launch a welcome back kind of a offer, which could either be an accelerated point redemption. So your points today have even more weightage than they had earlier, which is not a direct price reduction, but an indirect one. Second, build up your health, safety, and hygiene attributes to defend pricing. And third, I think best price guarantee is going to become really important. So monitor parity issues very aggressively, because even if you are not dropping prices, you could have a OTA which is desperate for business, dropping your prices, cutting your legs under you, or it could be a package consolidator or a wholesaler. So best price guarantee programs will allow you to stay on top of and defend pricing.
Great suggestions all around in terms of using other mechanisms to kind of get lower prices onto customers without dropping your actual rate. Paul, any thoughts from you before we move on?
Yeah, I just say, I mean, while the OTAs will of course come back in terms of their importance, right now they're not delivering. So that move towards your other direct channels, leveraging every possible avenue, your CRM, your relationships with previous guests. So we have a portfolio of about 200 units, and within that we can segment particular, let's say, high value units, and then from those look at the clients that we've historically had in those and directly target those individual clients who we know are in country, for example. So you can take levels of granularity of your guest base and speak to them directly, because you build these relationships. When somebody is paying, $3,000 or $4,000 a night for a stay, they're somebody, their name, right? So for us, it's been about being that focused on going after our former guests in the right way and delivering for them value propositions. So, and just put that into context, I mean, in the last month, we've delivered 10% of our revenue from direct bookings leveraged by our guest relations team with their existing clients. So they've gone back to their existing clients and they have been able to generate 10% of our sales. I think that's a very interesting proposition in a market like this. Every guest counts.
Yeah, I think this idea around this really is an opportunity to strengthen your relationships and increase your direct volume, especially during the early days of recovery, by doing a mix of some of the things that Apurva was talking about, and then just really focusing on it as you were suggesting as a primary channel. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I would even set some targets around how I'm going to come out of the recovery. That during recovery, I'm going to gain a few points of direct versus indirect share. So set some targets for my team around that. We're just like running short on time, so we're about 7 minutes over. I'm going to try to get us finished up by 15 minutes after the hour. So let's give quick answers to the next few. I hear a lot of people out there. I know Sunish is one of those who suggests that, hey, you got to keep marketing even during this time. Keep your awareness out there, stay visible. Um, and I get that. I would probably do marketing if it was free, but me like doing any paid marketing right now just seems crazy. You know, and I can't believe that that makes sense. I know advertisers would tell us otherwise. Are you guys actually spending any money on marketing at all right now? And how are you thinking about marketing during the recovery?
We're doing mainly our expenditure has been minimized for marketing, but some marketing channels you can do CPA on, which is fine. I.e., click per action, pay per booking.
So still doing some, but it's pay per volume.
Yeah, so pay for basically materialized bookings.
Performance based. Makes sense. Makes sense. Sunish, what are you guys doing at the moment? I don't know if Sunish can hear me. Maybe Paul, over to you. Are you doing any kind of paid marketing at the moment?
We did a little bit, just primarily to get in front of the longer stay potential guests that are out there in the market. Those guys that don't want to enter into a 12-month lease, but still require accommodation, that are in country. And so to present that option to them, which they may not have considered was available, we did a small bit of advertising, paid advertising. But that's the extent of it, really. And otherwise, it's all about leveraging our existing team to make those direct connections and to use what we have as a customer base for repeat stays.
Right, right.
In terms of marketing for us, we have not stopped our marketing. What we have really done is that in terms of marketing, we have almost consolidated everything to the domestic market more, and even to the other major markets, which we have just recently started again to put our advertisement towards. We are focusing on how we are. On a worry-free booking for future. So basically focusing on that. You can make the bookings, but you don't have to worry about any cancellation fee as up to 24 hours in advance. So that type of message has to go into the market, and that's why I do not think that marketing can stop. The marketing dollars could be reduced by 40 or 50% during this period, but it cannot be zeroed out.
Great. So, guys, we're running out of time, so I'm gonna push both the last two questions into one response for you. Our last two questions were kind of for you as leaders, speaking to other leaders. The first is, as you've gone through this crisis period, I wonder if you can kind of share one key learning or insight. And second is, what are you optimistic about? Let's give people some positive views from yourself on what are you optimistic about as we come into the recovery phase. Apurva, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think the last time we saw the crisis, OTAs were born, which fundamentally changed the way travel and hospitality distribution happened. And my hope is that this industry is amazing. It accounts for 10% of world's GDP, and similar number of people work in it. And people inherently are social people. So travel is not going to stop. Hospitality is not going to stop. We will come back stronger, better. And frankly, health and safety is what I call duty of care. So like we take care of our family, guests are our family. Like in Hindi, we say Atithi Devo Bhava, which is guest is God. So we just need to practice that, build it out, and we'll come back stronger. So that's my lesson on optimism. Like OTAs, we will see the rebirth of a new style of hospitality and travel, where we'll go back to the basics, which is taking care of guests as our family. And the second thing is, my personal learning is uh, treasure these times. I know these are tough, but this is the time to spend time with your family, spend time with your colleagues, and really, really show them you care about them, because the business is going to come back, and these are the people who are standing with you right now to be with them.
That's great advice, man. Gratitude for all the people around you and your family. So thanks for sharing that. Matthew, over to you for any kind of key learnings or insights and a message of optimism.
There's still business out there. Hopefully it'll return faster than we're expecting, but it's probably not going to be for a while. In terms of approach, don't be afraid to try completely new market segments or completely new businesses. There's no other way to operate in this environment, but there are opportunities out there. You just have to look in different areas that you may have not have touched before, and do it fast. Otherwise, someone else will do it.
All right, I'm taking away so far. Gratitude. Don't be afraid to look for new market segments. Sunish, over to you for closing words.
Well, number one, parity. Do not forget parity during this period. I think also, especially during the time when the markets will start to open up, because a lot of people from the OTA side or from the wholesaler side will ask you for a special. Do not get your parity direct booking initiative, for which a lot of us in the industry have put a lot of efforts. Let it go down. Number two, I think Boracay, for example, is today so beautiful, so clean, especially after a period of no guests around. I think it's a period where we should be thankful that there was a period where there was a rest for the whole world. And I see pictures from around the world, and I say that it's beautiful. We did not see that in the past.
Let's hope we can keep it that way. So great. Thanks for your closing words, Paul. Last slot for you, man. What are you excited about, and what's some key learning you have from this crisis period?
I think the need to stay flexible and to be able to pivot to deal with the prevailing circumstances around you, I think, is extremely important. I guess we're very lucky in that we're an asset-light business. We don't own any of the properties that we manage. We find new and unique ways of extracting revenue out of those assets on behalf of our owners, and we work very hard to make sure that we can optimize the revenues that are there. And I think that flexibility and that mindset of, let's find the revenue that's out there. There is revenue, as Matthew said. There is business to be found. There is business to be had. You just need to try and find the way of going after it, addressing your structure and your operation to be able to do that. I mean, we used to all sit in one office and working very hard together in one room. We now know we don't need to do that. We can run the business very well, working remotely. And there are all sorts of learnings that come with that in terms of how you ensure that your processes and your controls are in place and that everything works optimally without having to stand over it all day long. And so there are lots of positives, I think, out of this very difficult circumstance.
Great, Paul. Thanks for that. So learning from the experience and using this to kind of make yourself a better company and better leader moving forward. Looks like we lost Sunish, but Matthew, Apurva, Paul, thank you all for the discussion today. Because we're a little bit over on time, I'm going to skip the Q&A section for today. But we do have 4 to 5 questions in here. I will look through these and follow up. One that we can answer in just 1 second, since we have a panelist in New Zealand who's relatively close to the market. We did have Tom Wang, who asked, do we think the Australian government's going to open the border for international travel soon? Yes or no?
Not for at least 6 months, probably much longer. There may be travel between Australia and New Zealand before then, but for outside of that, not for at least 6 months, I think.
Wow. Ouch. All right. Well, thank you all for your participation today. I really appreciate it. It's been great to have each of you here. We also have a full set of slides from today's material. It does include a great kind of action plan draft that different leaders have put together. So if you'd like a copy of this, just shoot us an email, or we will post the full presentation on LinkedIn, so you get the slides plus a recap. This is kind of RateGain's view of kind of key actions you can be taking during the recovery. We'll add to this some key insights that were shared from today, so you have a written capture of both kind of pre-thought plans as well as new learnings for today when we share the deck, which will be out later on this evening. Thanks again, Apurva, Paul, Matthew, and Sunish. I see you've joined back. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining in, and have a great week.
Yep.